can make an island vanish. And these explosions, which are the single most violent thing the Earth can do, are caused by a bubble. But not a bubble of mere carbon dioxide. No, a bubble of something far more powerful. Now, there's an object in your kitchen right now that this resembles. The one in your kitchen is yellow or pink. You use it to clean things up. There's a cartoon character made out of it. What am I thinking of? A sponge, that's right. Volcanoes are full of water because they're giant rock sponges. There's so many holes in lava rock, you can get a lot of water into it. Sitting out in the weather for thousands of years, all that rainwater soaks into all those zillions of bubble holes left by the carbon dioxide, and then almost all of it stays inside. Let's pretend that this is a volcano. Kind of looks like one, and it's been sitting out in the weather for thousands of years, soaking up rainwater. But when the volcano erupts and then it stops erupting for a while, the lava and the ash that were on their way out, but didn't quite make it all the way out, that stuff cools and hardens and plugs up the volcano. And it's called a lava plug. And it traps everything inside. And it'll sit that way for a year or 10 years or 10,000 years, whatever it is. Until one day, it's time for the magma to rise again. And that magma is at least 2,000 degrees, often much hotter. Bubbles of steam, which is what you get when you boil water, are far more powerful than the bubbles of mere carbon dioxide. The bubbles of steam will become hundreds of times bigger than the water that makes it. Far too big to stay inside this bottle. It's going to be pushing with tremendous force to get out. James Watt, the man who invented the steam engine, figured this out. Boiling water inside a container is a source of tremendous power. So here we go, and remember, don't play with fire. The magma rises from deep in the earth and it immediately boils the water. But there's nowhere for all that steam to go because it's trapped in all the zillions of rock holes. And there's tons and tons of rock on top of it. And so the pressure builds and builds and builds and it pushes and it pushes and it pushes. And something's going to have to give. Something's going to have to break. Something's going to have to blow. Maybe. Is that cool? Thank you. Excellent. You heard that when it came out? That was the boom I mentioned earlier. And it's such a simple thing. Hot water stuck in rock. These explosions make nuclear bombs look tiny in comparison. These can flatten whole areas for miles and miles and miles. Here we go. Now, some volcanoes are nice and polite and they explode straight up. Okay, that's fine. But some of them don't. They explode sideways. You don't want to be on that side because there'll be nothing left of you but individual carbon atoms. Nothing. Here we go. Hundreds of times bigger than the water that makes it. There is no force that can keep steam from coming out. Eventually, the rock just is not heavy enough or strong enough to hold it back. It's gonna be a big one! People have wonderful stories, myths, and legends about volcanoes and how they do what they do. For instance, long, long ago, in ancient Rome and ancient Greece, where there are many volcanoes, people used to believe in many different gods for everything that nature did. There were gods of the land, the sea, and the sky. There was even a god for volcanoes, and his name was Vulcan. That's where we get the name volcano. It means Vulcan's home. And Vulcan, they thought, was the god who made things for the other gods. And so he was the craftsman, the blacksmith. And so when the king of the gods, Zeus, said, "Vulcan, make me this weapon," he would make it for him. And when the queen of the gods, Hera, said, "Vulcan, make me this magical thing," he would make it for her. And he lived and worked inside volcanoes. And so when the ground shook around a volcano as often it does. People thought, oh, Vulcan must be pounding his hammer on a mighty anvil to make whatever that is for one of the other gods. And when smoke and fire came out the top, he thought, he must be stoking the flames of his huge furnace to melt the metals he needs for whatever that wonderful and terrible thing is for one of the other gods. So that is how people used to explain to each other how volcanoes do what they do long ago. I'm going to tell you two stories about people and volcanoes. The first one's a sad story, the second is a happier story. Long ago in ancient Greece, in ancient Rome, there was and there still is a volcano called Vesuvius. Vesuvius is a volcano that can be quiet for hundreds of years at a time. So when the first Romans came into the area, because the farming was good, all they ever saw coming out of the top of Vesuvius was a little steam, so they thought it was Vulcan's little project workshop. They paid no attention to it. And soon a beautiful town grew up at the base of Vesuvius, a town called Pompeii. Such a pretty town that people would come from all over Rome to vacation there. And they would feel the ground tremble once in a while, but they just paid no attention. Well, one day in 79 AD, the ground began to really shake, and things started falling off the shelves. And then it shook even worse, and the shelves started falling off the walls. And then it shook even worse, and cracks started forming in the walls, and this got people so scared that most of them packed up their stuff and they got out of town. About 2,000 people, we think, remained behind to guard their homes and keep their businesses going. And then it got quiet, and so they were happy. In fact, it got spooky quiet, where the wind didn't blow, and birds didn't sing, and animals made no noise. It was silent. And out of that spooky silence, there suddenly came an enormous poof, and a huge black cloud of ash came rushing out of the top of Vesuvius, black and laced with lightning. It spread across the sky from horizon to horizon, blocking out the sun. And in the middle of the day, the town of Pompeii was plunged into utter darkness, darker than the darkest night. And then that ash began to fall, and it fell on the ground, and it piled up, and it piled up, deeper and deeper and deeper, until it was as much as 60 feet deep. 5 times deeper than the ceiling is above your heads right now. And the entire town of Pompeii was buried in ash. Eventually, the volcano stopped erupting. The ash cloud drifted away. People who had left town came back to find Pompeii had disappeared. This scared them so much, they moved away and never built there again. And soon the ash that would be rock beneath was good soil on top. Grass, bushes, and trees grew there when there was no trace there had ever been a town there. And so for more than 1,000 years, the town of Pompeii was forgotten to history. No one remembered it was ever there. 1,000 years later, some farmers came into the area because the soil was good, and they dug ditches to bring water to water their crops. And at the bottom of the deepest ditch, they found the top of a building buried underground. This got them very curious. So they dug deeper and they found the walls of buildings. They dug deeper, they found stone-paved streets, the way the ancient Romans used to pave their streets. And so for the last 1,000 years, we have been digging up the town of Pompeii that was preserved in a moment in solid rock. And this is why we know so much about the ancient Romans and how they lived their daily lives, because every object in every home is still waiting for us to dig through the rock to find it. Now, that's the sad story of people and volcanoes, but as I promised, I'll follow with a happier one. Much more recently, but still before you were born, something happened out in the cold and stormy North Atlantic Ocean in the mid-1960s on a place called Iceland, which is a big island surrounded by a bunch of little bitty islands. And one of those little bitty islands is called Heimaey. Heimaey is Icelandic for a good harbor. A harbor is where the water is smooth and flat, and the stormy waves won't bash the boats together or bash them against the shore. It's a safe parking lot for boats. And Heimaey has the best harbor in all of Iceland. So everyone living there, they all have boats, and they're all fishermen. They all fish the sea, and they love to do that. Well, in the mid-1960s, they all knew there was a volcano on their island, but nobody paid any attention. No one had ever seen it erupt. One night, everyone was awakened by an enormous crack, and a split went right across the island. And out of the top of the volcano came this thick, black, chunky lava rolling slowly down the hill toward the town of Hay. Now, Iceland is too cold for trees to grow, so they don't have wood to build their homes. They use brick and stone and mortar. So when the hot lava reached the first row of houses, they didn't catch fire. It just piled up behind them until it spilled over the rooftops and started filling up the next street. And then it spilled over the rooftops of the next house and started filling up the next street. And it was happening so slowly that people had enough time to get some of their things, get in their boats, and escape to the big island of Iceland. There on the horizon, they could see their little island. They could see the smoke coming out of the top of the volcano. They could see the lava coming down the hill, and they could see their town disappearing, one building after another. Now, the people of Iceland are tough and brave and clever. You have to be to live in a place called Iceland. It's beautiful but harsh. And they got together and they said to each other, we don't want to lose our town without a fight. And more importantly, we don't want to lose our harbor, because if the lava fills up the harbor, we can't be fishermen. It's the best harbor in all of Iceland. So they came back fighting with the one thing you have plenty of when you live on a little island. Came back fighting with water, with powerful pumps and huge hoses and water cannons. They pumped water out of their harbor and squirted it on the ocean, on the hot lava. And of course, it made a big cloud of steam. And for a while, they couldn't see what was happening. The breeze blew the steam away, and the lava was still coming forward. So they had to pull their water cannons back again and again and again, but they didn't give up. And slowly, that cold seawater started making the lava cooler and harder, just like the crayon that got hard. And so by doing that, they built a solid lava dam that stopped the liquid lava behind it. And they saved about half of their town. Eventually, the volcano stopped erupting. Now, I mentioned that they were clever people as well as tough and brave. And they found that if they drill into the lava rock that had covered their town and pumped water into the hole, they got hot water back. Free hot water for cooking and bathing. Nobody had to have a water heater, which is very expensive. They had so much free hot water that when they built their new homes, they put pipes running back and forth inside the wall, and they pumped all that free hot water and it heated up the whole house. So they got free hot water and free home heating. They also found that if they drilled really deep into the lava rock, they didn't get hot water back. No, they got steam back. Steam, as you've seen, is very powerful stuff. It can be used to turn generators, to make electricity. This is the bubble power of steam. We're not far from here, we have a generating plant. We're using coal or oil to boil water. It's very expensive to use coal or oil. They had their heat source for free. So they got free hot water, free home heating, and free electricity. You see, the lava rock will cool on the outside quickly, but because it's full of holes, it's like a blanket, and it keeps the lava rock underneath hot for many, many years. So that's a useful stuff down there. So that's the happy story about people in volcanoes. Usually we lose. Now, I can't talk about volcanoes without mentioning a place called Hawaii, our 50th state, out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, a group of islands. And out there, the crust of the earth is extra, extra thin. It's just a couple of miles thick. And right underneath the islands, the magma is extra hot. And so it will actually melt its way right through the crust of the earth and build itself a little volcano hill. But nobody knows it's happening because it's deep under the ocean. And it'll pile up until it's as big as a mountain. But nobody knows it's happening because it's still deep under the ocean. And it takes about 80,000 years for that volcano to build itself tall enough to poke its head out of the water. And those are the islands of the Hawaiians. And because the soil is good, soon there's a lush jungle growing on it, and we call it paradise. And we build hotels there, and we go vacationing.